All right, we are live. And I see there might be a little delay in my talking. So thank you everyone for joining us for our transportation talk. I hope everyone brought their coffee or their water, but hopefully you brought some good questions because today we have the opportunity to speak with some of our community transportation planners. My name is Rebecca Chaplin and I work with AARP North Carolina. Part of the reason that we convene this conversation with our partners is that we know that transportation is always a really big deal for helping people to age in community and age in place. Housing and transportation are always those top two issues that people have questions about, and the greatest need that people have in order to age well. So we have this opportunity to speak with folks who work in our communities. And I think what we'll do to start is actually let each of you introduce yourselves and share a little bit more about your role with either the MPO or also we have the Madison County Transit Authority here today. So Emily, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. My name is Emily Scott Cruz. I'm a regional transportation planner with the French Broad River MPO, which is an agency that assists in transportation planning throughout Buncombe, Henderson, Haywood, and Madison counties. And my specific focus with the MPO is on transit.
Well, perfect. Thank you. Transit's always a really big question among our members and our consumers, but everyone in general. John, you're next.
Yep. Hi all, I'm John Rideout. I'm a transportation planner with the French Broad River MPO, and currently I'm the acting TDM coordinator for at least one more day.
And TDM means?
Transportation demand management. So I do a lot of things, but particularly focus on congestion mitigation.
And you just said for at least one more day, which is an intriguing little comment there. Okay, is there anything else you want to say about that?
We have a new TDM coordinator coming on board on Monday, Hannah Bagley. So we'll be transitioning John over to full-time MPO staff, and Hannah will be taking over a lot of John's responsibilities. We've already started transitioning John to MPO for like, I don't know, a year. So it won't be too big of a change.
Got it. Well, good to know. We'll have a new face with us the next time we do one of these events. So Tristan, while you've got the mic, would you share your role and title?
Sure. I'm Tristan Winkler. I'm the director of the French Broad River MPO. And I think Emily and John already said our job is regional transportation planning in Buncombe, Madison, Haywood, Henderson counties, a little itty bit of Transylvania as well.
Okay, we should show a map of that at some point, just so people can see the area that the MPO shows. So if John or somebody else wants to bring that up on a tab, and we can share the screen and let people see exactly what your region is that you cover. I think that might be useful. And we have our guest with us today, Daniel Metcalf. Daniel, can you share a little bit about your role?
Yes, Daniel Metcalf. I am the Director of Transportation here with the Madison County Transportation Authority and have been here since December.
Wow. So you're kind of just, and what's your background, Daniel, hopping into this new role recently?
I retired at the end of November from the public school system and started December 7th with transportation.
Oh, wow.
My background has been with yellow school buses and activity buses.
Really? Oh, that is interesting. I think we've got a little bit of an echo, so we'll just, when you're not talking, yeah, you can do the mute situation. So I want to inform our viewers right now that if you have a question, this is your time. We have stuff we can talk about, but we want to answer your questions. So you can type those into the chat. You can type it into the comment section if you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching on YouTube. I think it's on the right-hand side. We really do want to know more about what's on your mind. And I guess I'm going to start while we're just starting to get rolling here with Daniel. I'd like to go back to you, Daniel, and hear more about like what is surprising to you about working in the Madison County Transportation Authority? What do you find interesting or surprising about this new role?
Well, it's all completely new. I was surprised mostly, I think, by the number of people that utilize the transit, even given the pandemic, which we're slowly building back up our numbers at this time. But
so it was still a
serve
high
lot of
need
different people. Mhm.
during the pandemic, and how has it been working out? Like, how can people access paratransit or transportation in Madison County? And what should people know about the precautions that are being taken as we're still in that COVID-19 timeframe?
So just before I arrived, they did install the shields between the driver and the passenger compartments. We do have the electrostatic sprayer that we spray and sanitize each day with the vans. Drivers and passengers are required to wear the masks, and we have very few passengers at a time on a van.
Okay. And so if somebody needs a ride, say for their COVID-19 vaccine, let's say somebody's interested in getting the vaccination and they need a ride, let's say they need to go to Buncombe County, for example, or, they probably don't. They can get that in Madison County, but how is that managed through the vans?
So they just contact our office here at the Transportation Authority and schedule, let us know when their appointment is, and we get them a ride schedule. If they are not one of our normal passengers, then they complete a registration packet before that we can transport them, but they just call and schedule.
Can you give us that number? Oh, you do that, and you take a minute. You pull that number up. You take a minute and do that, and we'll show it on the screen in a few minutes. And you can even type it to me in the private chat, and I'll put it up for everybody to see. That was just me being a little cheeky to ask you for that on the spot. And while we're talking about transit in general, Emily, first question I have for you is, how does paratransit fit into the puzzle of transit throughout the region? Like, how do you make sense of that, and how can you help our people watching today to understand what the differences are and how they're connected?
So paratransit is essentially services that supplement fixed route services, and they are specifically geared towards individualizing rides on the same schedule as existing fixed route services. So Madison County is actually a transportation service that is demand response, which means, like Daniel said, you call, you schedule a ride, and then they respond accordingly. So using paratransit in reference to Madison County is a little tricky, but places like Asheville, Henderson County, and Haywood County have paratransit that extends 3/4 of a mile beyond the existing fixed route. So if a route runs from point A to point B and you live within 3/4 of a mile off that route, you can call and the route will deviate or leave its typical trajectory and pick you up and take you where you need to go. Does that help?
That's great. That's great. And it leads into actually a question that we have, somebody has already asked us here. And that is, does MCTA only have paratransit? Now that you pointed to that paratransit extends kind of what transit does, how would you answer that question, Daniel?
Yes, we provide the service for those who do not have the direct access. No one in Madison County has direct access to a fixed route or rail system. So. Okay. So it really is, it's just paratransit. Yeah. And thank you for that number. We've got it right here so that people can call. What should someone expect if they want to call to get a ride? How far does service extend, and what is the cost associated with transportation services in Madison County? So we do serve the entire county into Yancey County, Buncombe County, and a little bit into Henderson County.
Wow.
The cost for transport would be in county is $5. Into Buncombe County or Weaverville area, that's $6, and into Asheville, we do have a $12 charge.
Okay. And I assume people need to call at least a certain amount of time in advance. And forgive me if you already said this.
We
How?
would like a day in advance, but
Okay.
if you call the day of, if something comes up, we certainly try to accommodate everyone that we can.
That's been one of the prime comments I've heard about MCTA is that we try to accommodate, anybody because it is really a community-based transit system that it feels like you're there to help people. And because you are a rural community, you feel that connection more tangibly. So thanks for saying that. Okay. Well, Emily, I'm going to go back to you because I think that there is some, exciting news that you wanted to share with people. Oh, may have frozen.
I froze?
No, I think it was me.
Okay.
So, Emily, you had some exciting news you wanted to share about the survey. I'm going to let you kind of launch that discussion.
Yeah. So currently at the MPO, we are conducting a regional transit feasibility study. This has been an ongoing process since, oh gosh, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was July or September of last year that we really got this underway. And in this effort, we're looking at how to improve regional connectivity among the counties that the MPO serves, Madison, Haywood, Buncombe, and Henderson County specifically. And we are currently in the last stage of our public engagement for this effort, which means that we have a survey that is available online through April 22nd, as well as additional information on our website, where you can get a little bit more information about what the study is and what we aim to achieve with it. And this current survey is really hoping to gauge the regional sentiment surrounding which routes would best serve the community.
Okay, so it sounds like I put the link in the comment section, and the survey's available through 4/22. How long will it take somebody to complete the survey? I know for me that's sometimes a deciding factor on whether or not I take a survey.
I think so far SurveyMonkey has told me it takes about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Not
So
too long.
click on that link right now. Click on it and share it with other people because this is your opportunity to provide input into transit planning for the future. Is there anything else people should know about the value of their participation in this public input process?
I'm of the opinion that any opportunity for public input is incredibly valuable. It's the best way that we can make sure that the work that we do really aligns with the regional needs and desires. And this in particular, this plan will hopefully lay the groundwork for future regional transit. And that carries a lot of implications for job connectivity, the way that our region is growing, and how people can get around more quickly and efficiently. So it's a really great opportunity to make sure that we know what is needed in your community.
Any possibility of planning a paratransit route to Barnardsville? I selfishly ask because I live in Barnardsville, but it does speak to, why I should take the survey. And also like what people might be wondering who live a little off the beaten path, just about the future of transportation planning in their area. Do you think that's just a pie in the sky sort of question? Just curious.
I am a pie in the sky sort of person. So I think that the importance of taking the survey, even if you live outside of the area that is typically served, is that setting up groundwork for regional transportation really can encourage neighboring regions to hop on board, so to speak, and connect as well. And I think there's a lot of potential in that.
Great. Well, thank you for opening up the possibilities. And I know there's a lot of discussion, or there has been, around the connection between intercounty, so between the counties, and then also between the city and the county. And I think I had wind of something coming, some sort of request coming through, that there be, and this has been for a long time, that there be greater connectivity between, for example, Asheville City and Buncombe County, and transit options. And I have the sense that something around, like, some of the local government funding that came down through some of the COVID Relief Act, or one of the acts, that there was a request that maybe some of that money be used towards that connectivity. Does that ring a bell? Is there anything going on in that area that people might be able to anticipate or learn more about?
Well, one of the goals of the study that we've been discussing is increasing local connectivity as well. So making sure that systems can be linked, in addition to providing routes that go from one county to another. As far as whether relief funding can be used to connect systems, I haven't heard of that. But Tristan, if I am incorrect in that, please fix me.
No, I think that's correct. I will say that especially with Buncombe and Asheville, we've seen a trend over the last few years of trying to bring those systems closer together. So I think the latest Asheville Transit Master Plan had a few routes where it was planned to extend them beyond city limits, which has in the past been the limit for a lot of transit routes. So extending the route going up New Leicester Highway beyond city limits into the county, the route that goes down Long Shoals, taking that into the county. There's more changes like that I think are going to be looked at and considered, as well as implemented. So I think we are seeing those systems tie in a bit more together.
Well, that's good news, that, a sunny outlook. As someone recently said to me, like, we're not going back, we're not going back to pre-COVID scenario. We're just going forward. And so I'm curious about how the experience of COVID-19 and everybody changing transportation plans and routes, as we've discussed on one of our last chats here, how that might really, change the use of transit, or is changing the use of transit planning for the future. Any like insights, or just kind of ideas on that? That could be anybody who feels, and it's okay if you don't. I'm just curious if there are thoughts on it.
I'll jump in a little bit. I mean, I think in the world of transit, it's been a bit of a shock to the system. I mean, it's been a shock to the entire transportation system. So, it's not just transit, but, I think that the transit agencies that we work with in our region have done a great job of trying to make sure that things are as safe and comfortable for people to use it as possible. But I think that a lot of things in the transportation realm rely on people's attitudes as well as their habits. And there's no denying that what happened in this pandemic certainly shifted everyone's habits. I am now very used to taking meetings on my living room couch. But it's also something that I think it's going to take a little while for folks to feel comfortable getting back into that habit. And so, again, that applies to transit, but I think we're also going to see that in terms of people going back to their regular work shifts, things like that. We still aren't seeing kind of the pre-pandemic traffic levels that we did in 2019. So, shock to the system is really what we've observed.
That's a great response. Does anyone want to add anything to that? it brings up a question for me about, people who work regardless of your age. Lots of people over 50 are working, and who don't have the ability to work from home. Like it's reliant upon them to show up because for whatever reason they're considered frontline worker, or they need to be physically present in the location. And then my mind went back to you, Daniel, and curious if MCTA offers paratransit for people for working circumstances if people have to get to work.
Yes, we do provide transportation for those certain individuals to work.
Mm-hmm.
And we are noticing, like, we're getting new registrations for new clients that haven't ridden previously.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully those numbers will keep increasing.
Is there
Especially in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've seen an increase in people applying to ride.
And what types of places are people wanting to go? Like, do they have to respond to that when they're needing a ride? Like if it's to a healthcare appointment or to shopping, employment, what sort of category? All of those.
All of those. And locally, the local nursing home has started taking their patients back to appointments. So those have picked up in the last 2 weeks, especially.
Okay, so MCTA works with nursing homes also, not just and community dwelling folks of all ages, it sounds like. Okay, yeah, great. Well, John, we haven't heard from you in a while. What do we need to know? What's going on the desk of John Rideout?
Well, I mean, I'll just piggyback on kind of some of what the COVID shock to the system has been. Is I would actually say that you've actually had somewhat of like a stretching of travel patterns. Kind of the peak, everybody kind of condensed into specific frames has kind of like been stretched out a little bit. I think some of our VMT travel data shows that we're actually getting at least back up to normal in some ways, but at the same time, it's coming back in a little bit different. So, our peaks aren't really as high as what they were pre-COVID, but you might see some of the AM or PM commute, become a little bit longer as far as the number of folks going, just as folks kind of, they shift their travel patterns and travel schedules a little bit more. There's just a little bit wider flexibility, and those that are teleworking, you don't see as much of the congestion hitting. So.
That's interesting. So what do we do with that sort of information? Like, I'm always curious about collecting data. It's something I have to do often with my job. And then you figure out, like, what do you do with it? So in your role, when you see these these changes of patterns, how does MPO apply that knowledge?
Very carefully. At least in my kind of perspective and role is, dealing with, say, congestion mitigation. One of the easiest things you can do to at least alleviate congestion is to kind of slow down or spread out kind of the travel demand. So in some ways, that's actually working in our favor. The other hand is that when things are being stretched out, some of our transportation infrastructure is really designed to be around like that peak AM, commute into work. Our transit systems have higher frequencies at those times. You have kind of the traffic models saying, hey, we need to accommodate X many number of vehicles at these times. And so with it spread out or kind of changing when they're happening during the day, you can actually start having to kind of change how you're servicing folks. So maybe I would say peak blood pressure time for the AM commute might not be till 9 or 10, or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but maybe it's happening a little bit later or not really happening as much in the end. So that's one of those things that you got to come back and say, okay, now that folks are using everything differently, how can we adapt ourselves to servicing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we would love to hear from people who are listening today about how your transportation patterns have changed, and what would you like to know? What would make your commute easier? And in addition to completing the survey and sharing the survey, how else can you collaborate with the work of the MPO? I mean, it's popular for people to have concerns, questions, complaints about transportation systems. It seems like it can be a bit of a, what do we call that? Like a scapegoat, But if people don't participate in the planning, then their voice can't be heard. So we really hope that people will participate. So please do type in your questions or comments. So John, while we have you talking here, we'll go build a little momentum. Is there anything else that you want to share? I know that there's some events happening in May that I've been, working with you on. You want to share a little bit about the Strive events of this year and the purpose, the timeline?
Okay, absolutely. So every May, our region sponsors something called Strive, which is actually kind of a shortened version of what the old program used to be called, is Strive Not to Drive. It's a week-long kind of collaboration effort between a large number of groups in our community to try to reduce kind of the reliance on the automobile as the only or primary source of travel. So during Strive Week, we usually sponsor a lot of different types of events. There's the kind of course, the Strive Pledge, where you can take a pledge not to use your automobile for that week. We do other items for kind of bicycle involvement. So there's the Ride of Silence that coordinates through also the National Ride of Silence that recognizes kind of lives lost on bicycles. Then we also have Roll Out of Work, which is a bicycle-friendly kind of leave the day on Friday to escape. We do walk audits for elementary schools. We do bike workshops for middle schools, and we are doing kind of one or two site visits that will kind of focus on multimodal transportation along specific corridors. And I think there's also something that you might actually be more aware of, is a really nifty kind of multimedia project that's happening that's going to kind of lead and launch our Strive Week. So I'll ask you, so is there something we need to know?
It is nifty, isn't it? So while we're talking here, I will share about on May 13th, and I'll put it's going to take me a minute to pull up the registration link and put it into the chat. But on May 13th, we are going to give a kind of a preview to the infrastructure changes that people might be interested in knowing about so they can participate and Strive fully. So that'll be changes in complete streets, greenways, and transit. And so we're going to showcase those, like people might be curious. And this is a Buncombe-centric sort of event, although there may be opportunities to spread out. So I will put that link into the comment section so people can learn more. And John, before we get to some questions that are coming in our comments area, is there a live link to Strive, or when can people expect to go somewhere and get more information?
Yes, we have a website that is strivebeyond.org.
Okay, I'll put that on the screen. But before I get to putting that on the screen, we've got some really interesting questions here. Let's start with this one. Oh, that was my response. What assistance are you folks expecting to come from AARPA? Who wants to take that one? And I guess AARPA, I'm assuming, is the American Relief Act funding. I'm assuming that's what that is meaning, and correct me if I'm wrong. How would you answer that?
Sure. If it's the latest relief package, then our region is getting a little more than $4 million in transit funding.
Wow.
That is set to be distributed through to our different transit agencies for them to apply to various, especially COVID-related challenges they've been facing. So I think that's something that will be very helpful. Again, I think transit in the last year or so has had to take on a whole lot. And our agencies have had to go through a whole lot of change. And so I think additional funding for our transit providers is going to be huge. I will say in previous relief packages, there has been other funding made available more towards kind of roadway and complete streets efforts. So our region did see a little less than about $2 million made available through one of the COVID relief packages. So that's money that goes into what's called our locally administered projects program, which not necessarily by design, but has historically gone predominantly towards bicycle and pedestrian projects in our region.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Before I put up the follow-up question, Daniel, do you want to say anything about any of these funds that might be coming through Madison County and how that might be applied?
So we have applied for some additional funds just to be able to operate for the remainder of the year.
Right.
As everyone else, we saw a great decrease in ridership. So we were able to keep all drivers and everyone still employed. But if not for the extra funds, that would not have been possible.
So those ARPA funds you have to apply if you're a local provider, like a county provider, you have to go through an application process to draw those down. Is that right? Okay. And is it a competitive process between different counties and municipalities?
I think it's just demonstrating the need.
Okay. Yeah. And Emily, I saw you lean forward. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, so the relief package funding that Tristan mentioned, the 4.5 million, is for urbanized area transit.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, I don't have the numbers, but I believe that rural areas will also be receiving funding for their transit system, and then other programs such as 5310, which is our enhanced mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. That also is receiving a small portion of money through this relief package. Most recently, Madison County applied for a grant called 5339, which is buses and bus facilities through FTA, and they applied to convert, I believe it's 5 buses in total, from gasoline to propane, which is really exciting for emissions in Madison County.
Neat to know. That's an interesting sideline there. Thank you for sharing that and describing kind of how these big picture APRA funds are organized. That's helpful. So there is another question here, a follow-up. Assuming ARPA is bringing transportation support, what public comment process is likely to put in place to engage with older adult audiences? So yeah, I guess that might be a question for you, Tristan.
There we go. I think that'll be dependent upon the different agencies that are set to utilize the funds. Honestly, I think a lot of the funding it's set to go towards keeping existing operations going. So there might be some fairly significant changes made, but I think when there's significant changes made, that'll go through each agency. But overall, I wouldn't expect a ton of difference. Again, transit overall, a lot of change, decrease in ridership, and so we're seeing a lot of systems that just keeping things going at current levels for now is the goal. Some expansions, it's possible, but we'll see.
Okay, that's useful. And I guess it looks like there's one additional follow-up question. You may have answered it, and then we have questions from someone else. But what are you advising your area transportation clients to do with the funding? And I think what I heard you say is it's really like a maintenance of existing operations for the most part. Is that right?
Right. We'll see. I mean, if you haven't noticed yet, transit funding comes in a lot of different flavors. There's lots of different pots, and each of those come with different eligible activities. And so with this most recent relief package, there's different eligibilities as well. So it's going to be a matter of how the agencies are able to match up that funding with, again, first of all, just keeping things at the baseline, but potentially trying to find additional improvements as well. But yeah, I mean, our general advice is to make sure those funds are distributed equitably throughout the region, and kind of trying to enable our transit agencies to utilize those funds as best they can to best serve their customers.
So it's going to be pretty much up to the local agency to determine, it sounds like, what the best use of those funds are based on their experience with their audience. Okay, makes sense. And that's a great way. I think that's a great role for the MPO to support what they see as being locally relevant. We have some great questions coming in, and I want to encourage people to keep them coming. Here's another one that we've received. It's a two-parter. How difficult is it to make changes in routes or transportation options outside of overhaul planning stages such as this? And then here's this part two. In other words, if community advocates want to improve public transit in their area, how hard is it really to typically do that? I think that's a great, like, on the ground sort of question for those community members that want to be engaged. So maybe somebody could provide some, not only guidance on that, but where to go, where they might, what community organizations they might participate in to amplify their voice. Emily, you want to take that?
Sure. So as far as specific routes and stops go, unfortunately, that is, I don't know if it's above our pay grade, but we at the MPO handle planning on a much broader level. So the systems themselves, like Asheville Rides Transit, they're the ones that would handle route and stop changes. And John, if you want to weigh in on more of the protocol there, that would be great.
Sure. So I used to do this in a previous role at a different employer, and definitely nowhere near on the scale of Asheville Rides Transit. I mean, that's a bit bigger, but I've done that, and I always say it depends. If it's something that's a question of, it is a stop in between two stops that are pretty long, and you're trying just to identify, okay, we're going to formalize this one. We have the time already built into the routes. The bus is already running fast anyway. Relatively speaking, not a big item. However, it comes down to a couple other things. One, when you can do the big revamps, you can actually build in potential changes later down the road that don't impact you as much. But after a couple of times, it almost becomes like wiggling a spider's web. As, okay, if you try to pull it this way, it's going to twist the whole thing that way, to the point of, if you're trying to do something where you're turning left on a major road, to service a stop or two that maybe has a tight turnaround, that's going to be a lot more difficult, because all of a sudden you're looking at, okay, do I have to redo the entire timetable down service route from that? Anything downstream will be impacted for that. So it becomes surprisingly complex the more that the route's been kind of tweaked after its initial kind of redesign, to the point where there hasn't been an update or a redesign in a while. A lot of the updates are very difficult, and likely the route is probably not performing as well as you would like. Even doing things as far as designing the route maps, kind of distribution information, that can be kind of a couple months leading up to it. And usually at that point in time, you're still testing your routes. It's kind of interesting that you really do have to run vehicles many times during the day, during your peak times, during your off-peak times. You have to simulate people boarding and unboarding the vehicle. So, I mean, when I used to do it, we would basically ride around in an empty vehicle, and every single stop we would do anything from 20 seconds to 2 minutes. I don't know if any of the paratransit did this type of testing, but we would test how long it would also take us to load or unload, say, somebody who is confined to a wheelchair at that particular stop, just because we knew it was going to be a likely service destination for those users. So that's kind of where it gets in, is what type of change are we looking for. It can be quite complex and takes months of testing. And even if you do have a good route, small changes to stoplight configurations, or during that route, if there's a repaving, that all of a sudden the crest of the road is just a little bit steeper, you might have issues or items where the bus could bottom out, or the turn might be too tight. So a lot of things can change. So it's actually very, very complex, particularly if you're really truly focused on hitting your stops and times at a particular timetable. It literally does start like wiggling the spider's webs of sorts. So it is complex, but if it's always something that, if you're working to improve public transit in your area, a lot of the transit agencies or jurisdictions have committees and commissions that take input from their constituents. I was previously on the multimodal commission for the city of Asheville. That was something, when they were doing the transit master plan and looking at the routes, they were taking input through those channels. And it's one of those things that you can really kind of see how and what they're doing along the stages, that says, at one point in time, they were looking, well, we might need to change this route this way, that way. And you're like, no, that works well for, a certain group. We need to keep that part. But at other times, you're like, well, why don't we have this route service? And it really does become kind of that complex interchange that, yeah, it can take a while. In some cases, there are kind of quick fixes that you're able to do. Sometimes even what it kind of looks like simple is like, can we just service that place over there? And you're like, this route's already averaging 3 minutes late. Do we really want to push it that far? What's the need? And you can kind of get into that conversations with both the transit operators, the transportation planners, and the general community and users.
Well,
Sorry, long answer.
Well, it's always nice to see you excited, John. So that's cool. That was a good, very comprehensive answer. And I see Tristan has a comment too.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say in general, I think it's, I won't say it's easy work. I mean, Rebecca, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think advocacy it's hard work. But I think we have seen, wins around our region. And I think that goes back to, I think we have a region with staff and elected officials who try to be as receptive to their residents and businesses as they can be. So in Transylvania County, we just saw a new fixed route kick off. If there's anyone from Transylvania listening, how many years of an effort was that? I think we had a meeting back in 2015 where people were saying we need to bring back this fixed route transit. Haywood County, similar. I think with the Asheville Transit Master Plan, we saw advocates really take a strong stand. And at the same time, we saw staff and elected officials try to work those concerns and those fixes in as best as they can. But it's transit is not overflowing with funding. So there are limits on, what people can do.
Well, that's well said. No, I think you're absolutely right. Advocacy is hard, and it's a long game in my experience, and involves lots of different parts. So if the person who had this question, Jessica, if you want to share anything else about where you live, and maybe there are certain coalitions or committees that might be a good place for you to have your input and connect it with the input of other people. So we can follow up with you if you are still with us and choose to put that into the comment section. Thank you for the great question. Keep those questions coming, because that is just really fun for us. And that's why we're here, because we want to hear from people and let you get an insight into the inner workings of transportation in our community. I always, learn something new in these processes. So let's see. We don't have any other questions right now. Does anyone have anything else they would like to update people on, or think that the public might want to know more about because you've received lots of questions on a certain topic? Yeah, Tristan.
John, what's going on with the Tunnel Road Corridor Study?
Ah.
Oh, yes. So, kind of one of the other kind of core planning things that we do here at the NPO is that we do corridor studies. So what these tend to be is relatively small area in-depth analysis. They tend to be more scouting oriented. So there's usually not like immediate kind of funding or projects tied to them that are going to take place right after. Usually it's kind of saying, hey, we've heard a lot of stuff going on Hendersonville Road, and folks say the congestion is bad out there. Would somebody please take a look at it? And we're like, sure, we'll do that. We're more than happy to do that. So our current ongoing project right now is the Tunnel Road Corridor Study. We have a community meeting that's going to take place via Zoom next Wednesday, April 14th at 5:30 p.m. So we have that available at the NPO website, so you can click and join in. What we're doing for this corridor is we're looking at kind of tunnel road between the tunnel itself, down tunnel to about where the exit 7 interchanges, and then down South Tunnel Road to Swannanoa River. We've been looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. It's primarily a transportation study. So we are looking at both safety along the corridor, how well the transportation network can handle the capacity and or any potential future capacity, as well as kind of like the impacts of what will happen as that corridor is probably pretty much primed to kind of turn over and redevelop within the next few years. So what we're seeing right now is that we definitely have kind of a quasi-dated kind of 1960s through 1980s kind of road infrastructure along that corridor. It has some minor flooding. It's got some line of sight issues. It's got some major pedestrian, completely lack of bicycle infrastructure along that corridor. And so what we're having is our study team look at it as saying, hey, what improvements do we need to make? If land and other kind of commercial developments kind of develop in the area, what kind of pressures are we going to see? Are we seeing the usage change? Because we do have the large mall sitting in it, but we also know that the kind of turnover with commercial properties is happening with that area. So it might not be, you know, say the Sears property might not just be a Sears location in the future with a Firestone out front, that it actually might have residential along with it. So we're kind of looking at that, seeing if there's any improvements to any of the side streets that we can make some of those intersections both safer and more convenient for the users, for all users, and any other improvements that we can even like identify coming out of that. So for us, it's been a very broad take. I mean, it is transportation focused, but it definitely hasn't stopped at transportation.
Wow, that is exciting. So we had information on the screen right now about that. Is it April 14th at 5 p.m.? Did I get that right?
5:30. So
let me just
5:30.
5:30. And then also we put into your comment section the direct link to more information.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Tristan, for sharing that so people can see, get involved. Who doesn't use Tunnel Road? So this is something of interest to all users. And what's a timeline that is anticipated for actually making changes on Tunnel Road and as a result of this planning process?
Well, that's a good question. It kind of really depends. I know that there are going to be items that the city of Asheville is going to look to probably pursue more in the short term, in the near term, saying, hey, I mean, this is kind of the point of the study, is to identify those low-hanging fruits that we can improve in the short term, as well as identify saying, hey, you really want to go this direction in the long term. What steps do we need to take to get to that long-term goal? So it's a bit of a mixed bag there, but that's kind of the point of the corridor studies, is to identify what can we do. It's kind of saying we know that maybe that this corridor has some of its challenges with kind of safety concerns or potential traffic concerns in the future. What can we do better? So that's really what this study is kind of identifying and looking to say, hey, this is going to be the short-term considerations, that the easy wins, let's say we can do it short-term. These are going to be the harder wins that we're going to have to kind of take a little bit more effort to get to. But generally speaking, you could see probably minor changes relatively soon, some of the bigger things with the redevelopment is going to kind of be on that planning timeline of 10 to 20 years.
Really good to know. I think you said there's a lot of challenges with Tunnel Road, and then the flip side of that coin, there's a lot of opportunities on Tunnel Road. So some of those things could be here, within a year. Like maybe they're just really low-hanging fruit, easy to change, easy to make safer. And some of those are really looking at infrastructure changes. Wow. So what else from anyone looking to the future do you think you've heard from the public with questions about that you think our listeners and viewers might be interested in today? And if there's nothing else, that's fine too. Just want to make sure there's room to hear any other big picture developments.
I guess one thing is the MPO is going through approving some of our future studies that'll be going through next year. So we'll be funding pedestrian and multimodal plan for Buncombe County.
Wow.
That would kick off probably later this year. A kind of greenway master plan for Haywood County.
Wow.
And looking at a study to, a feasibility study on how to extend the Reed Creek Greenway in Asheville. So there's more and more studies coming down the pipe. I think we've got a lot of studies going on right now. John just talked about Tunnel Road. We're kind of in late stages wrapping up Hendersonville Road as a corridor study. The city of Asheville is looking at Biltmore and McDowell. Henderson County just wrapped up their Mud Creek Greenway study. The town of Waynesville has a greenway along Richland Creek they're looking at. There's a lot of changes that our region's looking at kind of piece by piece, and I think I think a lot of them could be really positive changes.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to encourage people to like the page if you're watching this on Facebook, the MPO page, or if you're watching on YouTube, the AARP channel, because you'll find updates coming to you, and it'll be easy to see what's coming up if you stay tuned in that way. Daniel, is there anything coming up with MCTA the future that you think you get questions about, or you think people watching might want to know? It's okay if not. Just want to make sure you have an opportunity.
I can't think of anything.
Okay. I think just the baseline knowledge of how people can access services and that there are services is always something. It's like repetition is the key. We have to keep letting people know about what's here now and what we're looking for in the future. I guess one last thing that's on my mind, but I'd love to hear anyone who has a comment on to weigh in on. There's just been an increasing focus. I mean, I know this is a trend and it happens over time, but diversity, equity, and inclusion is just like so important. And right now it's an opportunity because it's really in people's consciousness. So I'm curious how the work of the MPO or MCTA takes into consideration that inclusivity. I know right now it's hard because people aren't in person, but not everybody has access to computers and technology. So what is your thinking on that topic and how to ensure that there's the greatest opportunity for inclusion?
Sure. I think from my point of view, from the MPO perspective, I think the most important thing is making people aware of the conversations that are happening and including them at the table. I think, Rebecca, we started this program a few years ago. What was it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago? But I mean, it's efforts like this of trying to make what's going on in the realm of public infrastructure and public funding more accessible to people. Right now, things are a little bit different, but I think it's continuing to try to go to people where they are, be available to answer their questions about what's going on, and making it clear that their input is not only welcome, but it's something that is really, really helpful and needed to build a more equitable transportation system. There's other things that we're required to do in terms of environmental justice analyses and things like that. But I think from my standpoint, one of the most important things we can do is continue to reach out to communities, continue to try to engage and bring people to the table.
I hesitate to speak after that because that was just such a great summary. And I guess the invitation is the call to action for people watching is, if you participate in a group where you can talk to more people and create greater inclusivity for these processes, bring it to them. Tristan, Emily, John, Daniel, they are warm, welcoming people who care about our community, and they want to connect. So should we put a phone number up here? Would that be useful so that people know, just kind of like if you want to just pick up the phone and talk to somebody, where they should call? We'll get that up in just a second here. I think we've got it typing in, and that's going to be, a good place to start is the Land to Sky Regional Council main line here. So I'm going to put that up on the screen. And gosh, it's just such a joy to work with all of you. You don't often see people collaborating so effectively and caring so much about the people in their community. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone today. Before we go, we have one more comment here. Are the links or posts that we can share on social media for the survey? So is there, so go ahead, Emily.
Definitely. I'll go ahead and send that to you. Give me just a moment.
Great.
And if we go to our the French Broad River MPO Facebook page, we've been regularly sharing the link to the SurveyMonkey and to the transit study where you can get more information.
Yeah, so it makes it really easy. You just press share when you see that, and we will go ahead and put that into the comment section. Are there any other questions from people with us today watching? Now's your time. You can always call Land to Sky Regional Council and get more information about any of these services, be connected to the right people. And we are just about done here. You may hear the child and crying upstairs. Is that audible to you guys? It wouldn't be a day in my house without some youth tears. Some people can relate to that. Okay, we've got the right here, the SurveyMonkey link, but like Emily said, you can, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the comment section so you see it, Jessica, on YouTube, and everyone else sees it on Facebook. Just, you can go ahead and go to that, or you can go to the French Broad River Metropolitan Organization Facebook page, and there will be a shareable post right there that you can share. So without further ado, we have been with you for 57 minutes, and we appreciated every moment. We'll say bye for now, but do subscribe or press like so you'll know about the next time that we're planning one of these events. We do them fairly regularly. All right, have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.